Okay, hello everybody, welcome back. I wanted to record, we're going to do Galatians 4, and I wanted to be by the water. I want to do that whole series by the water, but it's so windy, I could barely find a spot where there's no wind. So the water's on the other side at the end of the video. Too much wind, you won't hear my voice. That's the water garden, and that's the harbor bridge. They're going to build a new one. All right, Galatians 4. Paul taught the theme already, and he introduces justification by faith, comparing the law and grace, which is the main teaching in the New Testament. He introduces a new example in this chapter, so instead of me doing every verse, because he talks about some more stuff that I already discussed, I want to kind of hit on the introduction of the new idea or the new example, if I remember. But Paul says to the people, to the Christians, to the Galatians, he says, if you want to go back to the law, he already taught us in the last chapter that the law's purpose, it was like a tutor or a schoolmaster to bring us into the appointed time, the set time. I think if I remember the word in Greek is kairos, something like I didn't look it up, but I'm thinking of it, Kairos, talking about a particular time, a particular moment. That moment, that time, that set time was at the appearing of Christ, the time of Christ. So what Paul says is, we, humanity, particularly the Jewish nation, we were under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. So God had a whole bunch of promises that he wanted to release to his people, to us. But there was a sort of like a probationary period. And that whole probationary period for humanity was the covenant of the law. Okay? Now, Paul says, the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. So the example in the actual history of Israel, if you did have somebody in the household that was an heir, meaning he was a son, he was part of the true inheritance. But Paul says, as long as he is a child, he differs nothing than a servant in the household. He's still being treated like he's a slave because he's under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. So even though he has all these benefits, even though we had all these promises and benefits, the Jewish people had all the prophecies and all of the riches in the Commonwealth of Israel, all of these things that other nations even did not partake of until Christ. It says in Ephesians, at the time of Christ, he reconciled Jew and Gentile both unto God. And we are now also heirs of all these wonderful promises. So now what Paul is saying is this. If you want to go back under the law, get circumcised and become legalistic, that covenant, though you were a child, yet you did not really enter into the full benefits. Whereby today we have the Spirit of God, Paul says, in us. We cry, Abba, Father. We have received the adoption of sons because the appointed time has come. Jesus fulfilled everything. There's no longer any need of the schoolmaster, of the law, or of the tutor. So that's a good example that follows with everything that Paul said. Now we have received, we did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but we have received the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of God, of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. So now we have a relationship as opposed to just keeping rules, okay? Now, so I don't forget, the main thing I wanted to mention on this chapter 4 was Paul says, you that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? He's saying, listen to the story that comes from the Pentateuch, from the Torah, from the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which the Jewish people in Paul's day That was the main, they had the Old Testament. He says, Abraham had two sons, one from a bondwoman, a slave, and the other from a free woman, which was his wife Sarah. Now this, you would read, I'll note it along with this post, you'd read Genesis chapter 16, and Genesis 17, and Genesis 21. And we already covered Genesis 12 and 15 in the previous videos. Now Paul's saying, look at this. You that want to go back to the law, don't you remember that Abraham had two sons? Now the promise to God to Abraham was, I'll give you a son someday. And through that son, the whole world would be blessed. And Paul had already taught us in this book of Galatians that that seed was Christ. It was a particular son at the time appointed of the Father. Well, in the story of Sarah and Abraham, it's windy, I hope you're going to hear me here. The story of Sarah and Abraham, God promised them that they too would have a child. And over a period of time, Sarah did not get pregnant, and eventually they made an agreement that Hagar, who was a bondwoman or a slave, she would bear Abraham a son, which she did. She had Ishmael. But then eventually, Sarah, at the set time, the same scriptures used at the set time, the time appointed of the Father, Sarah gave birth. She got pregnant, and she had Isaac. Now, in Genesis 21, Paul is going to bring this story up now in Galatians 4. In Genesis 21, Paul says, remember the story that one day Abraham had a feast when Isaac was weaned, it says. He had a particular time of the age for Isaac. So Abraham had this feast. But the son of Hagar, the bondwoman, whose name was Ishmael, he made fun and mocked the promised child, the one born of the Spirit, who was Isaac. And what Sarah said was this to her husband Abraham. This is Genesis 21. Sarah says, cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the bondwoman and her son will not be heir. They don't have the inheritance with Isaac. Now Paul says, this is a figure. The King James says this is an allegory of the two covenants. The one from Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, and the other covenant of grace. Now, I focus on this in the teaching when I write on this chapter. Paul says these two sons, the one that was the son of the slave, Ishmael, and then Isaac, the son of the promise, Sarah's son, and Abraham, that's an example of law and grace. And when he says Hagar, the slave woman, she answereth to Sinai. And just for my friends who get more into some of the studies, there is a debate among Christians when Paul talks in all of his teaching how we are not under the law. We are not under that. And some say Paul certainly can't be speaking about the Ten Commandments. But Paul is certainly talking about the Ten Commandments and the whole Old Covenant, including the sacrifices and all. Some people say he's just referring to the ceremonial law, the sacrifices, things like that, not talking about the moral law. But in this example of Galatians 4, he's clearly talking about the Ten Commandments, because he says the ones that are under bondage, they're like the ones compared to Sinai. And what is Sinai? That's the mountain where God gave Moses the Ten Commandments. So the whole law. And he's also just talking about two here. He's comparing the Old Covenant, the law, and grace. So it makes it a lot easier when we understand. We can go through what some refer to as dispensationalism and talk about a lot of different covenants that God made with man. But Paul is just breaking it down. And Jesus really the same thing in the Gospels. He said, Moses said this to you, but I say this. He's saying this too, okay? And Jesus established what we refer to as the new covenant, his death, burial, and resurrection. Believing the whole message of Christ. Okay, so Paul says, Hagar and her son Ishmael. That's an example of natural Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. Paul was just speaking there about all of his fellow Jewish brethren who did not accept the Messiah. And they stayed in that old covenant. And he said all that Old Testament, Old Covenant does puts you in bondage. Because until you come to the cross, the new covenant, there's no way to be truly delivered, to be truly justified or saved. He says, and what's happened in that story was when Sarah actually said to her husband Abraham, cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman is not going to be heir with Isaac, my son. And Paul says, and he says, this is an allegory. King James, other versions says this is a figure, this is a type. He's saying this is showing us something. That even now, today, in the day he wrote it, he said the children of promise, the children of the Spirit, those who have received Jesus and have come out from that, it says they're like Isaac. But the Judaizers, the ones that are trying to get these Gentile Christians circumcised and get them back in the law, he said they are like Ishmael. Now, Ishmael is actually the father. Muslim people, now look, all Arabs are not Muslims, okay? But many Muslim people are indeed Arab people. And he says, we often look at these verses because in the Old Testament story, it talks about when Abraham sent Hagar and her bondson, if you will, the son of bondage, Ishmael, when he sent them away, God makes a promise. And he says, I'm still going to bless Ishmael. And there's still going to be, I think it said 12 princes will come out of him too. God says, I'm going to bless him. But he's going to be a wild man, and there's going to be wars and fightings. Now, rightfully so, a lot of people, when they look at this, they say, the scripture prophesied how, if you will, Muslims and Arabs are going to always be fighting Jewish people. What I want you to see is Paul does not use it that way at all. Paul is actually referring, when he talks about Ishmael in this chapter, theologically, he's not referring to natural Israel at all, meaning Jerusalem, which is below, okay? He's calling them Ishmael. Please understand this, because we live in a day where it's important for us to understand. A lot of prophecy teachers and all believe we need to go to war in defense of ethnic Israel and about where the capital will be, Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, and all these issues. And I don't want to get into them. All I want you to understand is Paul refers to natural Israel, Jerusalem, which is below. He refers to them as Ishmael. This has nothing to do with Arab, Jewish ethnicity. You understand? He says, those that are staying in the law, the Judaizers, the Pharisees, who were indeed natural Israel, he says they're Ishmael. They're the son of the bondwoman. And then he refers to Gentiles, non-Jews, which could include Palestinians who are believers and anyone who believes. He says they're children of the promise. So this has nothing to do today when we look at these stories of Ishmael and Isaac. It has nothing to do today with natural ethnicity, because he's saying Isaac, the promised one, are all the Gentiles who believe, so it's not ethnic. Do you get that? I hope you get that. But then what he says is, just like Sarah said, cast out the bondwoman and her son, because the son of the bondwoman will not be heir with the son of the free woman. Paul says, so it is today. So it was at that particular time in history. He said, those that are still in the law, those that were still in circumcision, those who did not come into the covenant of grace, he says they're continuing to persecute the sons of promise. And then Paul quotes Isaiah. And it's a very good verse, but it says, more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, saith the Lord. break forth into singing. This is more worship, because more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife. Paul is saying, if you look at all the Sarah herself and all the other women in the Old Testament that had all these promises made to them that they would have many children through their husbands, they're barren. These are women that normally in the Old Testament that was considered a judgment or a curse to not have kids. So God would move supernaturally and they would have kids. The Messiah himself, born of the Virgin, children that come from the promise, the children from the desolate, if you will, they're the ones that God supernaturally did something. And that's what it is to be born of God. God supernaturally, we've been discussing this situation, he just birthed us by his own free will. There's verses in the New Testament, James and Peter. Of his own will begat he us by the word of truth, that we should be kind of first fruits of his creatures, being born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible by the word of God, which liveth and abideth forever. So God supernaturally gave us the faith to believe the gospel. Paul says in Romans 10, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So God allowed us in our lifetime to hear the message of grace, to hear the truth about Jesus, to believe that. And the children of the promise. If you go back under legalism, if you go back under thinking it's the law or the rules or the regulations, because he says in chapter 4, he says, I'm afraid of you, or I'm in fear of what labor I bestowed on you, because you observed days and months and times and years. I think I have maybe wasted time with you. What he's talking about is that they began going back to the observance of all the wonderful feasts of the Lord and the Jewish feasts of the Old Testament. But all those feasts, Pentecost, Passover, first fruits, Tabernacle, all of these feasts were fulfilled in Christ. Paul teaches in Corinthians, let's keep the Passover, meaning the celebration now, because Jesus is the Passover lamb, he's fulfilled it all. Keep it with unleavened bread, with meaning he's not talking about natural bread, the host for communion. He's simply saying without malice, without sin. We're in this new covenant. Peter says, now we offer the sacrifices of praises unto God. So there was this understanding by the apostles, who I just quoted, Paul and Peter, that all of the feasts, all of the wonderful things that they symbolized were now fulfilled. It's all in Christ. It's all in this new community. It's all when we sit around and celebrate, whether you refer to it as Eucharist or communion, it's all fulfilled in Jesus. But the Galatians, the Judaizers, were trying to get them not only to get circumcised, not only to start getting back under the law, but also to begin introducing all of the Jewish feasts and festivals which were fulfilled in Christ. And he says, I'm worried about you. I think I've wasted time. I've labored in vain. My little children, he says, in whom I travail again in labor until Christ be formed in you. And I really like the story, the one he introduced in Galatians 4, about Ishmael and Isaac, and how it's not ethnic. It's not Arab Jew. Okay? It's not Muslim Jew that it's talking about. It's not talking about who we defend in world geopolitical stuff. He's saying we're kids of the promise. And he actually referred to natural Jerusalem, which was below, as Ishmael. So, please understand. But he says, and this is a verse I quote a lot, he says, but we are not from the Jerusalem that's below, which is in bondage to her children, but the Jerusalem which is above, which is the mother of us all. You know, some commentators have difficulty explaining that. It's not hard. They talk about some, in the Jewish understanding, believe there was an actual city, cement and all, that, you know, stones. But that's the same vision John had. I've been teaching Revelation. He says, I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So the Jerusalem which is above, Paul says, is the mother of us all. It's the church. It's the whole family in heaven and earth. You see, we're not just individualistic, okay? We're a community. So there's a relationship between the bride. The scripture says in Ephesians, Jesus gave himself also to purify unto himself a bride without spot and wrinkle. So we're a product, we, believers, are a product of this intimacy that the church, the people of God, have with the bridegroom, Jesus. And so we today, all who come into the kingdom, all who believe and come into the church, you're a product of that relationship, because it's that community that the believers have with Jesus, that intimacy that allows the word of the Lord to go out. That's where life comes from. And others here, they're sort of like friends of the bridegroom. John talked about that, John about that. But then they begin to hear, and they come in. So Paul is saying, Jerusalem, which is above, the community of God, the church, both in heaven and in earth, that's the mother of us all, because we're all being born again out of that relationship that the church has with Jesus, even in this day. Okay? So that's not that hard to see that. I want you to understand that, because when I taught it in Revelation, when John saw the city coming down, the Jerusalem above, he said it was the bride. Okay? Now, when I walk back, I think I did 22 minutes. I'm going to keep it on and talk a little, but that's it. I want you to focus on that chapter today for this video. I just want you to get to see. So I was by the Art Center here. It's the only spot I could find that there was not a lot of wind. And I always want to try and show you on this series of Galatians, just try and show you guys. Okay? The first thing that comes to my mind is the voice of the Lord is upon the waters. As the waters cover the sea, so God's word is going to go out to all the earth. So that's a nice shot there, downtown. I saw Chicago, the group Chicago in concert right here a couple years ago. As a matter of fact, they're coming back, once they had a good. Okay, that's your Lexington in the back. I'll mention at the end here as I'm walking. One of my friends, you'll know by now because I posted, by the name of Huey Martin, died just 2 days ago. Huey was a good friend of mine. And it's interesting, my friends give me little things over time. And one time, years ago, Huey he used to find stuff. And he found a big old shrimp, like a bait, plastic shrimp he used like as a lure. And he had it, and I said, man, I like that. I'll hang it up in my car. And so he said, okay, I'll give it to you, John. So then, they remember little things like that. And then there's a couple years went by. See, there's shrimp, they're fishing there. He would ask me once, he said, you still got that shrimp, John? That plastic shrimp? And I told him, yes. I said, yes, I got it, brother. I saved these little things, and it meant something to these guys. And just 2 weeks ago, I could share it more, but I saw Huey the last time. I had a sense, actually, when I visited his brother David the other day, I had a sense like, this might be the last time I might see. I felt that with David because he didn't look well. So when I left Huey, the day I seen him, I prayed for him a particular way. Maybe someday in the future I'll share it. It would be a whole teaching on our authority as Christians. Some of the verses where Jesus says to Peter, whosoever sins you remit, they will be remitted. Whosoever sins you retain. I prayed a particular prayer, but I won't give it to you now because it would take me 30 minutes to share how we have more authority than I think we understand to interact with people. But when he asked me about the shrimp, if I still had that plastic lure he gave me, I told him, yeah. But when Huey died, I remembered that little plastic lure I had a month ago. It fell. And I thought, I'll in the yard with some other stuff. And sometimes I burn things as just like, this is an offering. So I had that little plastic lure in my backyard where I burn branches, like barbecue pit. And I already put some other branches on top. It's just branches from the trees I burned. And I remembered, I said, I want to get that shrimp. Is it still here? And I dug all the branches out. I found it, the plastic thing that Huey gave me. And I stuck it back up. And I thought, these guys remember that stuff. This shrimp boats are out. Jesus said,